Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the AllChemist Channel. I'm Rich Trupeck.
Blair.
Jerry.
And it is a week later. We just happen to be wearing the same clothes again. So
These are our AllChemist out uniforms.
That's it.
And you can tell that it's another time period because we have a spread of food here.
Yes.
And there's an indication that we're getting gobs of money from industry and polluters and stuff like that. They're able to pay us off.
Stop the Trupeck brothers.
So, yeah. Anyway.
Okay, so we're going to devote episode 2 to the hot topic in Illinois, ethylene oxide, scary ethylene oxide. It's actually kind of a cool molecule, and God, I wish we had an organic professor of chemistry.
Let me see if I can fake it for you.
Okay.
One of the things that's really neat about ethylene oxide is a relatively simple molecule. Now, most of the things that are present in human beings are big, complicated, ugly things. But ethylene oxide is simple enough to describe. It's a oxygen atom joined to 2 carbon atoms in a 3-membered ring, and the carbons have 2 hydrogens on them apiece. So we're talking about 7 atoms. And that's really pretty simple for things that you find in living creatures. It is unusual in that it's especially reactive. It's hard to stick those 3 atoms in a 3-membered ring. That makes it easily reactive. If I can throw some sophisticated jargon, you can use this with your friends if you want. The ethylene oxide, because of the nature of that compound, is referred to as an electrophile. It reacts very readily with things called nucleophiles. Typical nucleophile is something like ammonia. Think of it as something like the 2 pieces of Velcro coming together.
Are there nucleophobes?
That's what I was going to ask. I'm not being a wise guy. Electrophobes and nucleophobes?
There probably are, but I don't teach them, so they're not important. But anyway.
I don't want to be called a nucleophobe.
You probably
Depends
will
on the
be, and it'll
nuclei.
probably happen a lot quicker than you figure out.
Okay, go ahead.
If you've got something like ammonia, you can think of it as like the part of Velcro that's got the hooks on it. And if you have something like ethylene oxide, you can think of it as the part of Velcro that's got loops on it. And if you put them together in the right orientation with enough energy, they will stick together and become something new. So it's relatively crude, overly simplified,
I'm so offended.
indication of what's going on.
I can make it cruder.
I'm sure you can. And probably if we get better refreshments, we probably will. But until that point,
Talk to craft services.
if you have ethylene oxide, it will react with a whole bunch of things that are potential nucleophiles, and as such, it's a potentially dangerous compound. And we want to treat it with proper respect. You may continue.
Thank you. I thought you were going to tell everybody to mix ammonia with bleach when you were going to ammonia.
Oh, good. Let's do something that'll get us sued. Brilliant.
Never, ever mix ammonia with bleach.
And the reason he said that is because he's going to bleep out all that sort of stuff there, because if you've got a 7-year-old watching this or something, you don't know what'll happen.
If you mix ammonia with bleach, it creates chlorine gas, which will kill you. So don't do that.
Depends on the concentration.
I did work with a guy at the store who would add a little bit if the floors were extra dirty because he thought it gave that extra kick.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he wasn't the best.
There was also the guy, we knew a guy when we were growing up who would not, he didn't, but we did, who would never drive his car except in idle.
Yeah, I mean, he'd go on main streets around the area, up the Burnham Bridge, that type of nonsense,
And
always
coast
in
down.
idle. And, well, and people would ask him, it's like, what are you doing? It's like, well, it messes up your engine to use the accelerator. It's like, you ever been on the expressway? What do you think all those people are doing? Screwing up their cars. He was just a good old Polak who was sticking to his story.
Now we got to bleep that out.
No, we're not bleeping that out because we're good old Polacks. Okay, so now we found out a little bit about what ethylene oxide is. Very cool molecule, very useful molecule. It makes a lot of stuff.
But it is, in fact, a reasonably dangerous material.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead, continue.
But dose makes the
Even
poison.
by standards.
Dose makes the poison.
I understand that.
Thank you.
So that in episode 1.
Sterigenics, this facility in Willowbrook that became the great Satan for the Chicago Tribune and a bunch of politicians. What they did is they sterilized medical equipment. Most medical equipment, if it's not melty, it's not going to be melty. That's a technical term there. It gets autoclaved, right? So high temperature, high pressure, and it kills all the bacteria, so your equipment's safe. You can't do that with stuff like silicone tubing because it's melty. And so ethylene oxide is a great sterilization agent. The way that happens is they put all the equipment in these chambers. They flood it with ethylene oxide for a certain amount of time. And then at the end, they do what's called back venting. So they evacuate the chamber.
Right.
So you've got two stages. You've got the actual sterilization stage, which will last for hours, if I recall, and then the back venting, which is a very short period of time.
Let me guess. When you back vent, you have to kill the ethylene oxide?
Well, here's what happened at the beginning. So the feds have all kind of rules to control hazardous air pollutants.
Okay.
What we think of as toxic, although again it's always a relative term. And there is one for ethylene oxide from sterilization facilities. And their initial rule was that you had to control all the ethylene oxide emissions all the time. Now, what happened in the 90s was that when people started putting in controls, they put in what we used to call incinerators, but now we politically correctly call oxidizers to burn them. And they had a couple of instances where people didn't really understand what they were doing very well, and the oxidizers worked just fine during the sterilization phase when the flow rates was relatively low, concentrations were relatively low, but then they back vented and the oxidizers blew up.
That's not good.
It wasn't good. So,
But did it destroy the ethylene oxide in the
it did. All the ethylene oxide was gone.
Can we look at the bright side of
You're
things?
just paying a lot for oxidizers. So the EPA at that point says, well, obviously we don't understand this real well. People who do sterilization say, back venting is just a very short period of time anyway. Just let us be exempt from control during the back vent process. And EPA says, okay, we'll do that. Now, going back to Michael Hawthorne, when he's in the middle of writing about all of this is the crusade against ethylene oxide and sterigenics. At one point, he came out with an article that said that the rule that allowed them to back vent without control was signed under the Bush administration.
Okay.
That is a true fact. It was signed during the Bush administration. But anybody who knows anything about EPA, and Michael certainly does, and I'm sure people brought this up with him, is that rules don't happen in 1 year. And if memory serves, it was signed in 2001. Rules happen because EPA has to go through this enormously long process that takes years to happen. So they got to propose the rule change. It's got to go to notice. They got to respond to comments. They got to go through another listing. So all the work to change the rule, 90% of it was done during the Clinton administration. And then EPA rolls along, Bush becomes president, and it gets signed in. And Hawthorne, and this is what he does so well, you kind of admire him like a Bond villain, presents it as, Bush is responsible for allowing this travesty to happen.
Isn't the most important thing in public health that we have identifiable villains?
Apparently.
That's what I thought.
So for those of us in the business who know how rules are made and how they come out, and we see this, we're like, this is the problem. Politics shouldn't even come into this. This was an EPA thing. Anyway, so...
Well, based on the same thing, though, he's a big admirer of Nixon because isn't that when the Clean Air Act was signed?
Yeah, and H.W. Bush, because he signed the Clean Air Act amendments we could go on all day.
Okay, but we're missing the key thing. You have this company.
What, are you talking?
Shut up, Keith. They're using ethylene oxide to do a good thing.
Yes.
But there are bad things happening with the ethylene oxide, right?
Yep.
What are the bad things that are happening?
Yeah, right. Okay, so before we talk about what is so scary in Hawthorne's world, the facility is required to have a permit to operate issued by the Illinois EPA. It has that, and that permit has certain conditions, and it's adhering to all those conditions. Some of those conditions are based on this federal rule that I was talking about, which does get changed to say, hey, you do have to control during back vent as well.
Does it get changed? Are you talking about the future or the future?
Well, get changed between then and now.
Okay.
And I can't. They were allowed to back vent for a long time, but then they changed the rule.
It has been changed.
It has been changed. It has been changed. And the way that most people control ethylene oxide now is to use what's called an acid scrubber. Because, as we all know, because we're did I mention we're all chemists? All chemists.
Do you know, I can put that on my next exam.
Oh.
Because we will be covering epoxides, which is what ethylene oxide is. And that way, students who are actually trying to find something out in detail about environmental causes can be rewarded.
Awesome.
How does a acid scrubber work?
It's
About 3 steps in a mechanism. That tough. You can do that. I might even be able to teach that to a journalist. I mean, if there was some point to it. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, he'd smile at you a lot.
Maybe.
No, he would. So the way that the journal controls acid scrubbers, because acid combined with ethylene oxide makes ethylene glycol, which we know is antifreeze. Which is also, did you know ethylene glycol is used in printing for its fountain solution?
They don't make newspapers with
Yeah,
it.
they do.
Oh,
They make newspapers.
Do you know that ethylene glycol will kill doggies?
I've heard that. It's supposed to taste really good to them.
It's sweet.
That's what I've heard.
It's awful.
So anyway, we've got the facility properly permitted, following the right rules. And then we also have what is called the National Air Toxic Assessment. So one of the things that happened in 1990 under the Bush the Elder was they signed the Clean Air Act amendments. And the Clean Air Act amendments changed the way we regulate hazardous air pollutants. Under the original Clean Air Act, it was all risk-based. And Congress told EPA, go find stuff that is emitted, just locally, but it's toxic enough that we should be worried about it. And EPA came up with precisely 8 compounds.
Okay, so if you're saying it's all risk-based, they're essentially saying if the danger is above some particular level, at some particular concentration, you got to do something about it.
What he said, yes.
Okay.
So they found 8 compounds to regulate. Radionuclides was one of them. Asbestos was one of them. So stuff that was especially dangerous. Well, environmental groups weren't really happy with that. They thought there should be more. So in the second round, 1990, they said, we're going to go from risk-based to technology-based. So we're going to identify 189 compounds, and you have to use maximum achievable control technology to control all of these. And that has a particular regulatory meaning that nobody cares about, right? And so that all happened. All these rules got promulgated for all kind of industries to use maximum achievable control technology, including sterilizers.
That was put into effect.
Yeah.
As part of the, what do you call it, federal...
Yeah. So this rule I was talking about where they blew things up,
Okay.
that was
Okay.
the MAC rule. And then the next thing is, under the Clean Air Act amendments, they have to identify residual risk. Okay, everybody's putting in the best controls possible. Now we're going to look to see if there's any risk left.
So essentially, you're removing all the stuff you can by the technology we have, and anything else that is passing through that, we have to decide how dangerous it is.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So one of the tools for this is what's called the National Air Toxic Assessment, or NATA. And NATA's purpose is to evaluate risks in 2 ways. One is cancer risk, and the other is non-cancer, other health risks, right? For cancer risks, they define the risk in terms of something called URE, which is unit risk estimate. And for all others, it's a reference concentration, are the 2 terms, right? Don't worry about what they mean just yet. And when they do this NATA assessment process, they assess all the airborne exposures that you have. So there's exposures related to industry, there's exposures related to mobile sources, there's natural sources, there's community sources like houses, fireplaces, that kind of thing. There's altogether 10 things that go into the NATA formula
Okay.
for every compound that they're looking at.
Okay.
And one of the places where NATA predicts a higher concentration than others of ethylene oxide is around Willowbrook. And why is it so? Well, it's modeled concentrations. So in our world, we work with models a lot. And not the good kind. Yeah. You never know we're brothers. So when you model something, you're putting in data. Here's how much ethylene oxide the place says it emits. And here's how it emits it, because if you're emitting it up high, it's different effect than if it's down low, too slow. One of the things with people who use ethylene oxide is they have to account for ethylene oxide that comes from equipment leaks.
Okay.
And what you do when you account for equipment leaks is you count every flange, every valve, every place there's a connection. And then you apply the standard leak factors.
Okay, so this is not necessarily the amount that's leaking. This is the amount that the computer program says is probably leaking.
And it's what everybody reports.
I knew we'd get to global warming, but go ahead.
Shut up. It's what everybody reports because it's the worst case number, and you never want to be in a position where you're reporting less than you might be provable by somebody else, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, they treated this for NATA purposes in the model as real emissions that are occurring at ground level and escaping the facility, none of which was really going on.
Isn't there a way of assessing whether that is truth? Can you actually go there and measure?
Yeah.
Okay. And did people do that?
Eventually.
And did they find the numbers were what was predicted?
No.
Okay. Continue.
So yeah, they didn't find these super high concentrations. Not that really matters because
Sure.
if they found anything above background, that's all they needed, right? Anyway, so you get this conclusion predicted by the models, and then in an effort to, there was a lot of backlash when this first came out from people like us who knew how, where this data is coming from and why it's crap. And you'll see Hawthorne in his stories as he goes on, he starts making sure that when he talks about the 4,000 or 5,000 pounds per year, whatever it is, emitted from Sterigenics, it's as the facility itself reported. He uses that language.
Is that because the facility reports in a NATA format?
Yeah.
So essentially, it's a theoretical number. Even though it's reported by the company.
But since it's self-reported, he continues to make that
so
point.
So there's a little journalistic sleight of hand.
Yeah, it's what he's a master.
They sawed the facility in half, but it's not really sawed.
Right. That is correct.
Gotcha. Cool.
That's correct. And incidentally, so there's other people using ethylene oxide at this point. Chemical facilities, and there it's consumed. It's not. It's meant to be consumed in the process. And some genius in the state legislature, I found out later, decided that all of those chemical facilities should be put under a roof. So if you're using ethylene oxide, you put it under a roof. So now if you have an ethylene oxide leak and you're under a roof, what have you just made?
You've concentrated the ethylene oxide.
What have you made? Bomb. This is why refineries aren't under roofs either.
Gotcha. Okay.
You don't put things with flammable chemicals of any kind under
Remember
roofs.
the witch scene in Monty Python? The witch scene.
The witch scene?
They're trying to figure out what does a witch do. And eventually they nurse it out of the, I think it was the Eric Idle character.
Oh, yeah.
That's what you made me feel like.
Yeah, good.
Also, this is one of why Mark Watney almost blew up on Mars. Mars.
Yeah. So, all kind of lessons here.
I'll ask about that later. Go ahead.
So where were we?
We've got a number for the maximum amount of ethylene oxide that might be leaking from...
Yes. And they do some tests. They find, some numbers that are greater, some that are not, whatever. And then we talk about actual cancer, and I'll turn it over to Jer for this part.
Because I was at a conference, and ex-Illinois EPA guy had talked about...
Alex Messina.
I didn't know if I was but I guess he said it publicly, so what the hell? talking about one of the cancer clusters that gets reported, for the area, that the number of cancer cases over what was expected was 9, and it's not like an area where 30 people live. So, I mean, it was that allowed everyone to say there was an increase in cancer there.
Now, not entirely clear to me. So apparently there's some number out there related to the location of this ethylene oxide business that is associated with a higher than expected number of cancers.
Yeah, you would figure X amount of people should get cancer in this
Y
area
amount
if you're
got
not
it, Y
trying
amount's
harder.
bigger.
So,
And the EPA guy that you were referring to, whose name I've forgotten, but it's not Keith, said that was bogus.
he didn't say it was bogus. He was just pointing out the fact that it was 9 people that allowed people to say,
9 people in a cluster is like
Okay.
baseline.
So
noise.
baseline noise.
you're saying it's statistically not significant?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And presumably that's his area of expertise, and he should know statistical significance and not.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
I don't know what's statistically significant in that area, but
That's-
presumably you guys do.
yeah, 9 is not.
Nothing.
No.
Gotcha.
So then what happens, we got a new governor who appoints a new director, John Kim. Kim's a longtime employee of EPA, and he's got a problem because he's getting a lot of pressure on him to shut Sterigenics down, close the doors, which is something that EPA just doesn't do. Because, there's kind of a covenant, right, between industry and the agencies. You give me a permit and rules to follow, and if I follow them, you allow me to operate.
Yeah, it's some of the biggest problems we've seen, and I know not to say names, would be when people if an industry was either trying to hide when they were breaking their rules or just really dug in their heels over something stupid.
Yeah.
That's when EPA goes after someone. We've never seen them really be rough on someone who is like, tell us what to do, we'll do it.
Okay. So we're running out of time, but basically we've got rules for ethylene oxide. Sterigenics uses ethylene oxide like crazy. They're following the rules.
Not like crazy, sanely.
They're using a lot of it. Right? I
Yes.
that's their...
More than their neighbors probably were. Yes.
Anyway, they use a lot of ethylene oxide. They're following the rules. People are coming down on them, and this EPA guy is stuck in the middle.
Right. And he issues the order.
The order being?
He uses his authority under Illinois Environmental Protection Act to lock down the supply of ethylene oxide. So it's not that he shuts the facility; they just can't use ethylene oxide anymore.
That's clever.
Yeah, that's the way that works.
Seldom used power.
Yeah, I don't know that it's ever been used. And basically, he's the excuse that they give to the judge, and the judge, goes along with, is that they're a danger to the community because they emit. Well, so does, thousands of others in the state emit stuff that is, somewhat less dangerous, some stuff that is more dangerous. I got some numbers from the National Emissions Inventory. Total ethylene oxide emissions in the state of Illinois for the last National Emissions Inventory, which EPA conducts, was 6.37 tons. Benzene, another carcinogen, common carcinogen, is emitted by a lot of sources throughout the state, 14,000 plus sources. So ethylene oxide, about 6 tons. Did you look at the benzene number? You did. Okay. So what do you think? Just take a wild guess. Price is Right rules.
300 tons.
5,432
Cool.
tons.
Now, have you, in your past, come in contact with benzene yourself?
I have, yes.
And when might that have happened?
In the lab in chemistry.
Other than that,
when we're filling up my car.
it's probably the case, because if you smelled anything while you were filling up your car, you've you've ingested volatile components in gasoline, which include benzene.
Yeah.
So our reasonable assessment is how many people in Illinois have been exposed to benzene?
All of them.
Pretty much. You know?
Yeah.
Okay. Continue.
On a continual basis. The other...
But we don't know the dose, do we?
No, we don't.
Continue.
We could model it. So the other real quick point I want to make about NATA and National Air Toxic Assessment and how they do this is the URE, the Unit Risk Estimate for Cancer, is based on how much is your risk increase to get cancer if you are exposed to 1 microgram per cubic meter of this pollutant every day of your life for 70 years.
Okay.
That's the basis. So nobody, I mean, you literally have to follow, even if you model that high of a concentration, and believe me, it's a high concentration, you'd have to follow the wind patterns around for your 70 years on planet Earth to make sure you got that kind of a dose of ethylene oxide if you live by Sterigenics. So it's presented like, oh my God, if you get this concentration, you're automatically going to get cancer, and lawyers jump on it, but it's got nothing to do with reality. In the 3 minutes we have left, Lair knows something about ethylene oxide that is not produced by evil people, but is produced in the evil people and good people.
If you want to learn that, you're going to have to show up for another podcast, because I can't do it justice in 3.5 minutes, and I'm not going to try and trivialize
All right.
it.
All right.
Unless I decide to go into journalism,
Well,
then I might do something like that. But
Well,
at this point, so what I want to know is when all this stuff hit the fan. At that point, they had information on concentrations of ethylene oxide in the area around the Sterigenics plant. And what do those numbers look like, just qualitatively?
Would they
How would they
the
compare it?
measure around there?
Can you measure a background ethylene oxide concentration for, say, the Chicago area in general?
You could, and we haven't. Sterigenics actually did that. They went and took concentration measurements, and you got some higher, some lower.
How much does it vary with things like weather and whether it's a weekday or a weekend, stuff like that? Any idea at all?
I don't.
Okay.
But I do know, some of the measurements, and it was interesting to me when the higher concentrations they got inside City Hall in Willowbrook, or Village Hall in Willowbrook.
Nice.
So they got actually inside building that was higher than outside, which was presented like it was, oh my God, this tells us how terrible this is, but it's more like
It's kind of
tells us something else is going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in any case, I would not ever be worried about living next to a facility like Sterigenics or anybody else using ethylene oxide. The number of cancer agents that we are exposed to are hundreds, thousands, right? I mean,
No question.
there's mutagens all over the place, and there's natural mutagens. Maybe we should also talk about the Ames test next time.
Sure.
That would be a good one. So this really is much ado about nothing. And I know people are so invested in
that.
it.
It's potentially dangerous if we really can't have some of these medical parts.
Well, I think the problem is we really haven't gone into enough evaluation of the risk associated with what's happening specifically around, or what was happening specifically around Sterigenics. But that would apply to other places that use ethylene oxide as well. And I'll have to wait for another cast for that.
It's just picking any one chemical for us as chemists, and I'm speaking for all three of us, picking any one chemical in isolation, focusing on its worst characteristics, and then cherry picking data to show that this danger supposedly exists here and not there. It's a crap way to do science. And we got to close with this. So this woman does this study that gets published in the Tribune, talking about that she goes and measures some derivative of ethylene oxide in people's blood. And it was, I don't know, I think it was like 90 people. And the people who were closer to the Medline plant, which is another one that does sterilization, showed higher concentrations of this derivative than people farther. The study is not peer-reviewed. She's a U of I, but U of I wants nothing to do with it. There's no control group. We don't even know what the derivative is. I'm assuming it's ethylene glycol, but I don't know that.
No, if that's probably something I'll talk about. I'm not familiar with the study, and that'd probably be a good idea if I look at it. But there is a particular marker that is commonly used as an indication of ethylene oxide in a human being.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it a magic marker?
No, it's not.
Okay. Just wondering. Okay, well, that's it for this week, folks. We will see you next time, where we'll be talking more about ethylene oxide and toxicity, and look up the Ames test. You'll like that. See ya.
Take care.
Adios.